We're less than 24 hours away from the first round of the NFL Draft, a pivotal moment for this Arizona Cardinals team in its rebuild, and we got the best in the business. Trevor Sikkema, Pro Football Focus. We've been churning out mock drafts on a daily basis. I hope you have the PFF Mock Draft Simulator. Trev, how we doing less than 24 hours away from the big day?
Guys, obviously very excited to be with you and get to talk some football with you guys, but I'm going to be honest. I'm done talking about it. Like, I want to see what happens, right? I've done so many mock drafts. I've had so many great conversations. We've talked about the what if, like what could happen. I'm just really excited about that at this point to just find out what's actually going to happen here on night one.
Okay, well, I'm not going to spare you a J.J. McCarthy question off the top here because it does feel like over the last 24 hours, based on what some people are reporting, and maybe even kind of the numbers in Vegas, is the J.J. McCarthy hype train dead on arrival? Like, because I do think Drake May is going to go third overall to New England Patriots. Then suddenly, like, could the Vikings just stay at 11-23? Are the Giants not in on J.J. McCarthy? Could we look back, Trevor, on this entire draft saga for 2 months and say the J.J. McCarthy hype train was overblasted by the media, by scouts, and then maybe he just falls to where he was really supposed to go to?
Man, it's a multi-layered answer there. I'll start with the McCarthy part. I think that there's a lot of things to like about McCarthy, but this whole time, and I've said this on different shows that I've been on and even my own podcast, like, it's felt like a game of telephone, right? It's felt like a game of, you know how in the game, like you tell somebody something and they're supposed to repeat it, but they get something wrong, and then that person will get something wrong on top of that. And then at the end of the game, like the end of the telephone is way different than what the beginning was. I think people looked at J.J. McCarthy and went, hey, you know what? Really like what I saw in 2023. Got a lot better from 2022, improved in a lot of different ways. And then somebody went, yeah, you know what? I like McCarthy too. Hey, you know, maybe he could be a first rounder. And somebody goes, hey, you know what? I like McCarthy too, but I like him a lot, man. I'm thinking maybe top 20. Then somebody goes, well, what about top 10? All right, top 5. Okay, now he's going 2 overall. So it's like, it's just, how did we get here? You know, we get to the end of the line, and now, you know, to answer your question, it seems like, okay, well, is now JJ falling? But I like the way that you phrase that because I think it's more of just regression to what it probably should have been all along. JJ McCarthy's a good quarterback prospect. He really is, but the top 10, top 5 love always felt really rich. And now we're hearing of scenarios of, okay, it feels like we're getting closer to what we know is going to happen in the top 3. Caleb at 1, Jaden at 2, Drake May at 3. And then we've heard, well, all right, it seems like the Giants and the Vikings more were hoping May was going to slide down. And look, again, maybe that still happens. But if not, maybe they don't love McCarthy, right? Maybe it's not just this scenario where for the longest time we said, well, there's 4 quarterbacks that could go in the top 5. So that means that who's ever left on the board at number 4, Arizona will be able to call up the Giants, call up the Vikings, call up the Raiders, call up the Broncos, call up one of those teams, and they're going to bid against each other for McCarthy. And in reality, maybe not all 4 of those teams like McCarthy. Maybe none of them like McCarthy that much. And I think that's kind of the part of this that we're now exploring of how we're getting to this reality that we think we are solidified with the top 3, but as we're analyzing what is going to happen and trying to predict what happens at number 4 with the Cardinals, it's not as much of a home run. Yeah, Monty's going to go off and deal the pick like he did last year, like we know he is capable of doing, because if there's not a suitor who's going to give him a realistic deal, why would you move on from Malik Neighbors? Why would you move on from Marvin Harrison Jr.? And I think now that's the conversation that we're having about the Cardinals about 24 hours out from draft night.
Yeah, I mean, let's get into that conversation because it feels like it's one of the final things that we need to get aside before we actually get to who is trending towards the pick for the Cardinals. But Monty Austin, he used the analogy of he loves his home. He wants to, you know, set roots there in the ground at his new home and raise his family, his wife, his beautiful kids. But if somebody knocked on his door and said, and, you know, overwhelmed him with a price, that he's rounding up the family and he's getting out of there. He's taking the overwhelming price tag. But are there teams that you feel are going to get desperate at this point, or are they seeing that J.J. McCarthy, they could have him and not have to pay the price to Monty Austin for it, and he would be fully content with taking what player's available at 4?
Well, yeah, I think the answer is a little bit of kind of the way that you set up the question there, right? It kind of depends which quarterback is there. You know, if Drake May were to be QB4 on the board and he's still there, it sure sounds like the Giants and the Vikings would both be very willing to move up. And I think you'd have a serious bidding war between those two teams. You're probably talking about, the Giants number 6 overall pick, but then probably something on day 2 this year, probably something on day 2 next year, maybe even a first next year, depending on what Minnesota's offer is. And Minnesota's offer, right? You got to think that, well, the reason they traded for number 23 this year is so if a situation came up where they were happy trading up for one of these guys that's available, they've got the ammunition to do it. Now, I will say this. For the Vikings side of things, I think it's been very easy to just plug the Vikings in with them going up to number 4 no matter what, trading away 11, 23, and then future assets. It gets sort of difficult when you talk about, well, is it worth it to move all the way down from 4 to 11 for Arizona? Because you talk about some of the wide receivers that they're going to be giving up if they do that. Now, they could always trade back up, and it's true, but it's difficult to do what Austin Fort did last year. Not that he can't do it again, but it's a lot of moving parts, and sometimes you just run out of time to be able to do it, and sometimes it's just not as easy as that. You've got to have kind of deals lined up to where, okay, one domino falls and the next one immediately, like a chain reaction, just boom, 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 this immediately happens, and it doesn't always work like that in the NFL draft, and I think that he knows that. So for the Vikings trade, I've seen a lot of people say, all right, well, it's going to take 11, it's going to take 23, and then it's going to take 2024 draft capital as well to get all the way from 4 to 11. I don't think the Vikings are going to want to give up anything in 2025. I really mean that. They give up their second-round pick this year in order to get number 23, so they don't have a second-round pick next year. So they're certainly not going to give up a first-round pick this year, a first-round pick next year, and a first-round pick in 2025, because that means they're not even picking until the third round of that draft. I also don't even know if they're going to give up a third-round pick, because then they're not picking until the fourth round and then day 3 of 2025. So is Minnesota really going to want to do that? I'm not so sure about that either. So the price maybe isn't as high as you would normally think, but again, maybe Minnesota doesn't even want to deal that at all because of who's going to be left on the board. And I think, again, that's the interesting parts of this conversation is before it was, well, does Minnesota want to try to trade up all this to go get a quarterback? And now it is, do they want to do that for McCarthy specifically if he's going to be the only one left on the board? And now you're talking more of, okay, exactly who it is. You're putting a face, if you will, to the trade-up portion of this conversation. And that is the part that, again, I don't think we'll get the answer to that until they come on the clock.
You mentioned potentially dropping out of the top 10 and missing out on one of the big 3 wide receivers. Trevor, what do you believe is the floor for Marvin, Neighbors, and Rome to go? Because I think that's a big sticking point with Cardinal fans is, number one, they don't want to trade. Number two, if they do a trade, Neighbors and Rome are going to be gone. All these teams that need receivers are right behind them in the top 10. So what do you believe is the furthest? Let's just assume Rome is number 3 on most people's boards. Where's the furthest he could fall before being selected, in your opinion?
The true floor is the Jets at 10, right? If he makes it to the Jets, I mean, he's going to be a New York Jet. There's no question about it. I could answer that with the Bears at number 9 as well. I think that they would take him, although Matt Eberflus, the head coach in Chicago, his whole defense, centers around a really good 3-technique defensive tackle, and they don't have that on their team right now. They could draft one in Byron Murphy. So not 100% guarantee that they would take Rome Odunze if he's available. They could opt for Byron Murphy, but again, that's a floor spot as well. And then I'll also say there is a world where the Falcons want to get out of that 8 pick. And so they're calling people a little bit later and saying, hey, who wants to come up for one of these wide receivers? Maybe if a quarterback's still on the board, you're doing that as well. So anywhere from 8 to 10, but I would say to the spirit of your question, 10 is the floor for Odunze. And that's why things get a little bit tricky with Arizona, because if they trade out of the top 10 with any of Minnesota, Denver, Las Vegas, if they have aspirations of still trading down just to trade back up, you're basically going to have to trade to one of those spots and then already have a deal in place, essentially, with the Titans at 7 or the Falcons at 8, who I think are both 2 teams that would like to trade down here in this draft.
I feel like we're finally in a space where we can actually analyze what Marvin Harrison Jr. would potentially bring to the Arizona Cardinals. And Johnny, for as much as we've talked about this, we haven't talked about MHJ wearing a Cardinals uniform and catching passes from Kyler Murray too much. Trevor, we want to give you the floor as maybe our first guy to get a crack at it and maybe break down what that would look like and mean to the Arizona Cardinals as a franchise going forward.
No, I mean, it's huge. It is. And we're seeing the impact of wide receivers all over the league. I mean, if you're one of the top receivers in the game, you just do so much. Now, look, is this valuable as a quarterback? No, of course not. But what Justin Jefferson does to Minnesota, what Jamar Chase does to Cincinnati, shoot, what Amon-Ra St. Brown, he just signed a massive contract. What he does to the Detroit Lions, like you just see, it's just a total flip of the switch of what you can do on offense when you have a player of this caliber. And to me, Marvin Harrison Jr. reminds me of like a Devontae Adams style of wide receiver, where it's just, he's just so good at everything. And of course, I'm not calling him Devontae Adams yet, but what Devontae does so well and why he is considered one of the best, if not the best wide receivers in the NFL is because he has such a mastery of the position. No matter what coverage shell you are in, whether you're in press coverage, whether you're in off coverage, whether you have inside or outside leverage, Devontae knows exactly how to attack you. He knows how to tempo the routes. He knows how to set you up with his releases. He knows how to fool you with his head fakes and his shoulder fakes. He's great with his feet. He's fantastic throughout his routes, whether it's at the beginning, the breaking point, or finishing with good speed at the end. Those are all things that I have seen Marvin Harrison Jr. do at the college level. But I have faith that he can become that type of well-rounded, all-around, true all-pro receiver in the NFL. And so when you have that, it just benefits so much of your offense in so many different ways. You get other wide receivers open. You get to manipulate space. Like if you have him on one side and you have bunch formation on another, well, all of a sudden you can't just allocate all of these resources over to the bunch side of things because you've pretty much got to have two sets of eyes at a minimum on Marvin Harrison Jr. He's just going to carve you up. So now you've got even bodies or even +1 on one side of the heavy side of the formation if you've got a lot of wide receivers over there. So it's like he can change the numbers kind of a wide receiver. And I'm not saying he's going to do that for day one, but he's got that kind of potential. And that's who Marvin Harrison Jr. is to me, and that's why he is my number 2 overall player behind only Caleb Williams in this draft.
Trev, I'm going to put you on the spot. Give me 2 players, one of which that you think is going to go higher than people expect, and another player that maybe we've touted in mock drafts or otherwise that could fall a little bit into day 2 or even day 3.
Yeah, I think the faller to me, the 2 that kind of stand out this week are Jackson Powers-Johnson and A.D. Mitchell, 2 really, really talented football players who I think depending on which team you ask, they might say, oh, yeah, I mean, we'd take this guy in the first round, absolutely. And other teams might be like, yeah, we'll let somebody else take him in the first round. We're not going to lose sleep over it. So those are 2 guys that just for different reasons. I think Jackson Powers-Johnson, he's got a little bit of an injury history that I just don't think is being as widely reported, and I think that some people are a little bit lower on him. Certainly the center position of just positional value overall. It's a deep center class. So you really got to take him in the first round. He might slide a little bit for that. A.D. Mitchell, I love the highs of what this guy could do, but there's no doubt about it. There seems to be a discrepancy in the high-profile plays versus just the mundane plays and the effort level, the speed. It's just different, and anytime there's varying effort, the teams get a little bit wary. So I think that those are 2 guys who could very well slip into day 2, early parts of day 2 when we were mocking them in the first round all along. Guys who I think could go a little bit higher. 2 that immediately come to mind. I think there's a shot that Xavier Worthy could be the 4th wide receiver off the board. I don't think there is a consensus of, it's going to be Brian Thomas Jr., who's the next guy, or like I said, or an A.D. Mitchell or whatever. I think everybody you talk to says the same thing. It's the big 3, and then it's a big gap. And anytime there is that big gap, if we're acknowledging that big gap, you're saying that there's going to be a lot of variance in whatever comes next. Like there's going to be a lot of flavor of who would you rather have here. And I just feel as though Xavier Worthy, certainly the long speed, but also I feel the way I've heard people within the league kind of talk about him, it's more universally positive than I thought it was going to be. Like we're not talking about him like we talked about Jalen Hyatt the previous year, right? Where he was like just this vertical threat and not really much else. It seems like a lot of people like this guy a lot more as a football player. So him maybe as wide receiver 4 in this draft. And then Jordan Morgan, the offensive tackle from Arizona, I think has just gone under the radar. And We've often not put him in first rounds just because there's been flashier names, Tyler Guyton, Kingsley Suamataia, guys like that. But genuinely, I think that Morgan could be drafted even ahead of those guys somewhere in the late part of the first round.
The arm length isn't an issue for you, or it isn't with teams for the most part?
Well, I just think that teams can look at him, and the reason why I think he might sneak in the back end of round 1, arm length is an issue for me. It's why I'm a little bit lower on him, because I think that he might be more of a guard. But when teams look at him, I think they look at that guard potential for him, and they just see the versatility. They don't really see the limitations as much. They just see a guy who can play both. It's just, again, the way that I've heard people talk about him feels as though he could be a riser up into the first round.
When we look at 27, we'll get you out on this. You've been so generous with your time in the entire offseason, the entire draft season. 27th overall, wide receiver, if it's addressed early in the draft for this Cardinals team, they neglected the edge rush position. Maybe Chops there. I don't know about the big three. Who could they potentially target in that range, I guess? Can you give us maybe like 2 or 3 players?
Yeah, absolutely. So if they want like Chop Robinson, I'd rather wait and hit that at the beginning of the second round. I'd rather see like, okay, because Chop to me, crazy athlete. Obviously, we know that, but just the backfield production wasn't there for him. He's not going to do much for you defending the run. I think he's going to be a pass rush specialist at the NFL level, which is fine. Obviously, like Hassan Reddick certainly has been a phenomenal player throughout his career, just being a pass rush specialist, and it's been absolutely worth it. Like Bryce Huff was that for the New York Jets, and it's obviously worked out really well. It's very valuable, but I think that's more of I'd wait for that at the beginning of the second round. End of the first round at 27, if one of the lockdown corners gets to you, right, like Kool-Aid McKinstry, Nate Wiggins, Cooper DeJean, I think any of those 2 players, Terrion Arnold and Quinyon Mitchell aren't making it that far. But any of those lockdown corners I think are there. But the dream, fellas, is Johnny Newton. That's the dream. If you get out of this first round with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Jerzon Newton, I mean, it's just masterclass if that's able to happen. I love Jerzon Newton. I have him as a top 12 player in this class. I think the league is lower on him than I am. I don't really know why. Like, okay, I get it. Like, he's a little bit, the length, he's a little bit lighter in weight. But watch the tape, man. The effort's through the roof. He's playing everywhere from 5 technique to 0 technique. He stays blocked for half a second at the most. And his hands are always working. He's so quick getting through gaps. Sure, he's not like a hold the line kind of a run defender, but put him in 3 technique spots a lot. Like put a strong nose tackle next to him. Give you a strong base end next to him. Let this guy pin his ears back and play some damn good football. And he's been able to over the last 2 years at Illinois. And I think he would be able to for the Cardinals as well. To me, he'd be their most talented defensive lineman right off the bat. So
do you know what he told us at the Combine? He said that no team met with him more during the college football season than the Arizona Cardinals. So I think the Cardinals are speaking your language here, but I'm with you. I think 27, it's a gift from the football gods. I think Monty Austin, if he sticks and picks at pick 4, Trev, that he will have an inkling to either trade up or trade down with 27. I don't expect them to make the pick at 27. If Jerzon Newton falls into the early 20s, you shoot somebody a 3rd round pick and you go get him.
If they come away in this draft with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Johnny Newton, I'm buying a Monty Austin jersey. Or like, or like, I don't know, for a GM, what is it, like a suit, like the tie, like whatever.
You
like,
might have to shave your head, actually.
The
you might have to go bald.
Equivalent, shave my head, whatever. Like whatever the equivalent is to buying a player's jersey because you like him. If Austin Ford can do that, I'm doing that equivalent for what he's been able to do as a GM over the last couple of years, because that would be incredible if they were able to do that.
We were wearing Monty bald caps before it was cool, but you can join us. You can absolutely jump on the bandwagon. You need to be jumping on Trevor Sikkema's bandwagon the rest of the way. Most talented draft analyst expert out there. Check out the Pro Football Focus mock draft simulator while you still can. And look, it's going to be fired up soon after the NFL draft. You're going to want to use it for day 2 and day 3. Get to PFF.com. Read Trevor's great work. Follow him on Twitter at Tampa Bay Trey if you haven't already done so. Trev, thank you so much for your help, your insight this draft season.
I appreciate it, guys. It's been fun talking to you all draft season. So this is great, man. Can't wait to see how it all unfolds.